All right, let's take one last bite at the budget and some expectations for this afternoon, that supplementary budget to be delivered later. Let's now chat to Martin Kingston. He's the Vice President of Business Unity South Africa, or BUSA. Martin, great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Morning, Leanne, to you and your viewers.
Gosh, it's been a rather sobering morning talking to different people in terms of their predictions for what we can expect out of the supplementary budget. And I must say, it's not been good news at all. It's going to be a very, very tough one. What are your expectations?
Well, I think you're right. We are in unprecedented, uncharted territory here. It's a special adjustment budget in the light of COVID-19. We were already in a recession. That recession has been massively magnified by COVID-19. As you know, we're anticipating a contraction of between 8 and 10% in GDP for this year. The Minister of Finance at NEDLAC last Friday said that the deficit could balloon out to 13% for this year alone. I mean, that is really a very parlous state of affairs. We know that our revenues have diminished radically, some 300 billion rand shortfall that the Commissioner of South African Revenue Services had already advised us of. We're going to have to constrict our costs very substantially. We're going to have to prioritize ruthlessly in terms of the expenditure that we are prepared to incur for the foreseeable future. And we're going to have to make sure that we pivot our attention to those that are in most need, both individuals and small and medium-sized entities that need to be supported through the pandemic and indeed through the economic downturn, which, as I said, has been exacerbated by COVID-19.
Where are we getting this money from, Martin? And I think that's the big question, because we're seeing tax revenue falling. We're seeing a lot of the income that, the state was getting is not getting that anymore. And we're now opening up and taking loans from wherever we can. And this is going to leave us in a very precarious situation as well. So, and like we spoke to our analysts before, saying we are borrowing not to grow, but to pay off debt, which is a big problem. So perhaps you want to address this.
Well, first of all, it is correct. We are seeing our debt to GDP ratio growing, in fact, accelerating. It's very worrying for all of us. Debt service will become, again, the most significant component element of the budget. We can ill afford that. We're going to have to tap new sources of debt. Yesterday at the Strategic Infrastructure Development Symposium, it was clear that we're going to try and raise debt both domestically and internationally, not on the sovereign balance sheet. And infrastructure is a key contributor and indeed driver of economic activity. We all recognize and acknowledge that. We're going to have to increase our tax take. And that means that people are going to have to be much more responsible about paying for their taxes as soon as they are obliged so to do. But in reality, what we're going to have to do is cut our expenditure whilst we're trying to stabilize and increase our revenues over that period of time. We're going to have to form a longer term view, probably over the next 5 to 10 years in reality.
I mean, we look at now this public sector wage bill, which I know I've asked everybody about, and particularly to COSATU as well. They're adamant that they haven't seen increases over the last 12 years, that it's remained stable, and that it's not a big issue that we have a very big wage bill. However, the minister is on a very different path, and it'll be interesting to see if he remains steadfast in saying that that public sector wage bill has to come down. What are your views on this?
It is a very big issue. The minister is absolutely correct, and we've said so consistently. The public sector wage bill is one of the biggest single components of the budget. We need to reduce it. We need to increase productivity. By the way, it's not just a public sector wage bill. All costs that can be curtailed need to be examined, each and every one. That's why he talks about a zero-based budgeting approach. What we cannot afford to do at the moment is give increases or pay any costs that are in fact surplus to our absolute requirements to ensure that we've got a viable and sustainable economy. And unfortunately, the public sector wage bill sits at the very center of that equation, and we need to tackle it head on.
I mean, let's talk about the SARS revenue shortfall, because this is going to be massive. We obviously have seen a very, very big dent with regard to COVID-19 and the collection of taxes, and also with alcohol, cigarettes. I keep on bringing that up because this is a huge contributor to the tax revenue, which is going to fall. How is he going to intend on making this up?
Well, we think that it was necessary for alcohol and liquor to come back into the economic equation as we moved through the lockdown levels, and we've seen that that's happened with level 3. Obviously, there are attendant health and societal ramifications we do need to consider, but the duties and taxes, as you say, from alcohol are very significant, and the same applies to tobacco. And we've said that there needs to be a consistent, rational approach to going through the lockdown. We are very concerned about the tobacco that is being sold in the country, from which there is absolutely no tax revenue whatsoever. And we don't believe that it's going to be possible for the minister to substitute for either excise duties and taxes from alcohol or tobacco from any other source at this particular moment in time. We also think that it's going to be very difficult to justify increased taxes unless and until such time as the electorate at large and the tax-paying community can feel satisfied that those taxes are going to be responsibly and appropriately not only accounted for, but distributed according to a set of key priorities for the country.
Yeah, state-owned enterprises, many economists saying that they personally do not want to see another cent being thrown at SOEs because they're in such a dire situation, and that could be, good money being thrown away again. SAA is just one that jumps to mind. How do you think the minister is going to handle the state of SOEs now?
Well, we first of all, we welcome the appointment of the SOE Advisory Council by the President that has been recently announced. It's long overdue, and they're going to have to look at the sustainability, the viability, and indeed the contribution to the fiscus by each and every one of those state-owned enterprises. And I think that goes to the heart of the question that you have asked. We, as Business Unity South Africa, have been consistent again in saying that those SOEs that do not make such a contribution need to be migrated off the state's balance sheet as a matter of urgency and placed where they are better capable of being supported if, in fact, they've got a role to play at all. Those that are not viable should not be supported, and I'll be extremely surprised on behalf of business if we see the minister giving any support, given the limited resources that we have as a country at our disposal, to failing state-owned enterprises at this moment in time, particularly when actually the primary requirement of this budget is to ensure that we can alleviate the suffering for a large number of our people, including those that have been rendered unemployed directly as a consequence of COVID-19, when we have potentially a devastating set of health outcomes that is confronting us as a country, and where we need to reinforce, in fact, the health system, not failing SOEs.
I mean, we've obviously been spoken to about those the contingency plans that are in place to fight COVID-19, and the talk of all of the monies that have been handed out in terms of UIF, in terms of that unemployment fund, in terms of increased grants that have been given out. So there's a lot of money that's been given out, and we know that we were getting loans from just one IMF to name one of them. But now we need to see something new coming from the minister as to how we are going to recover these funds and how South Africa is going to recover from all of this. Do you think that he will outline this for us in this budget, or are we not yet there yet? Because we've still got a very, very tough couple of months ahead of us. Can he talk to recovery as yet?
I think the minister has to talk to recovery, and recovery is a function of confidence and investment, indeed, particularly by the private sector, both domestically and internationally. In a set of circumstances where many of our competitors around the world are suffering the self-same issues that we are, and also are having to attract capital. He, at the end of last year, in the National Treasury paper, tabled a number of structural adjustments that we fully supported, policy measures that were long overdue in terms of their implementation. And I believe that urgent implementation is the order of the day. I will be very surprised if the minister doesn't emphasize exactly what needs to be taken to restore confidence, to change the economic trajectory to one which is inclusive, sustainable, and accelerated, I have to say. And the only way that we can do that is by taking the very difficult decisions that have eluded us over the past several years in the immediate short term. In other words, taking those decisions and implementing them during COVID-19. The pandemic is going to be with us not only for this year, but probably for much of next year and even potentially beyond 2021. We have no time to lose. We need to implement those changes now so that we can secure the benefits in the medium to the longer term.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Mark Kingston, for talking to us. Mark is the Vice President of Business Unity SA, discussing the supplementary budget that will be delivered later on this afternoon. Now, the Maluti